want to be turning in your Bibles to the passage we're going to focus on first, go ahead and open to Isaiah chapter 1. So we have been telling Bible stories, and we have come, of course, if you've been here at all for the past month, we have come to the exile. And I'll say it again. Capital T, the, capital E, exile. Now, growing up as a kid, I knew the stories of Samson, in which the Philistines were harassing the Israelites, and God raised up Samson, and Samson went and actually was given like a superpower from God. It's the craziest thing. And went and defeated the Philistines. And then at some other point, the Midianites rose up, and they were harassing the children of Israel, and God raised up Gideon, or God raised up Deborah and Barak, and there's all these heroes. King David is always fighting enemies, and so you get the impression that there's a whole bunch of maybe what you might call exile. When you hear the term the exile, well, God's people were always under some kind of fighting or stress, or they were always getting carried off to some other country or something. No. They would get harassed. A few people might get carried off throughout the history of Israel. They were all those peoples over there were always fighting each other. But this is the big one. This is the big one. About 200 years before the southern kingdom of Judah is destroyed by the Babylonians and everyone gets carried off into exile, the northern kingdom of Israel is destroyed by the Assyrian Empire. And the people that live, the 10 northern tribes, are scattered to the wind. In fact, if you ever hear anyone refer to the lost tribes of Israel, it is because those northern tribes, they got carried off, they got redistributed to the northern, from the northern kingdom into all of the Assyrian Empire, and who knows what happened to them? Who knows what happened to them? In the New Testament, later on, occasionally, we will meet someone who is Jewish, who is identified as a member of one of those tribes from up north. Well, apparently their ancestor was living in the south at the time that happened, because it gets kind of complicated. I don't want to go into all of it. And then the children of Israel that lived in the southern kingdom, they lived in the time of Isaiah. Isaiah lived in the southern kingdom at the time that the northern kingdom was utterly destroyed by the Assyrians. And why were they utterly destroyed? Because the Assyrians were stronger? No. Because they had worshipped gods other than the one true God. And not only was it a lie that it's okay to worship those other gods, but God allows pagan nations to worship pagan gods, and He doesn't destroy all of them. What's the problem with Israel worshiping pagan gods? Well, God had met with their ancestors on Mount Sinai and said, I will be your God. You will be my people. And as long as you worship only me, I will bless you. But if you go to worshiping all these other gods, I will allow plague. I will allow invaders. I will allow nasty things to happen to you. I will allow drought. I will allow the invader to come in and take you away. And the northern kingdom of Israel, ever since they split off from the kingdom, they never got it right. They did a lot of idol worship. They did a lot of horrible things, and God put up with it for several hundred years. By the way, how patient are you? How long do you put up with something that absolutely disgusts and makes you sick? None. Ralph's like, I'm Barney Fife. I nipped that in the bud right when it started. When we think of God destroying Sodom and Gomorrah and telling the children of Israel to go conquer the promised land and kill everybody, and He allows the Babylonians and the Assyrians to come in and utterly destroy His people almost, we need to remember that the theme of all of those things that we skip over, because it's kind of the boring part, is that God allowed these things to go on for hundreds of years. God is so much more merciful and patient than we could ever imagine. And when Jesus comes into our heart, we learn to be more like Jesus and more like God. And hopefully we become more patient people. But God has put up with this for hundreds of years, and Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah was supposed to learn from her northern sister, Israel, and turn and worship only God. And Isaiah lived in that time that they were supposed to learn that lesson, but they didn't. And God even said to him, they're not going to learn. He even, in chapter 6, there's a grand story of Isaiah getting caught up into heaven and seeing a vision of God sitting on His throne. And God commissions him to go forth and preach my word, even though people are not going to listen. I thought I had a rough call. Oh, well. The reason we're in Isaiah today is because I want to look at a prophecy before I tell the story. Now, at the end of 70 years, as prophesied by the prophet Jeremiah, God said that you will be in exile for 70 years. They get carried off in the 580s BC. 70 years after the destruction of the temple, they finally lay the last stone and finish a rebuilt temple. Yay! Just like God had promised. But I want to show you, as we tell the story of the children of Israel. In fact, there's actually 3 stories, so don't get worried. But there's actually 3 stories we're going to run through kind of quick this morning. As the children of Israel come back to the land, rebuild the temple, reinstitute what God had commanded on Mount Sinai, and even rebuild the wall and the city of Jerusalem, in the end, it's all going to be very disappointing. This has got to be, there's a reason you almost never hear a sermon on these stories. And certainly probably not the way I'm going to preach it. Now we're going to meet some characters that are good, godly men, and they are worth emulating, and they are worth learning things from. In fact, someday when we blossom to about 200 or 300 people, and we have that building campaign, we will probably do like every other church in the history of churchdom and do there's that, but decline after growing, yeah. We learned about that from Brother David Mifflin if you came to those meetings. We're going to talk about that later. But every time a Baptist church has a building campaign, what book of the Bible do they study? Kitty knows. Does Larry know? It's about building. Nehemiah. He was going to make Israel great again and build a wall. We're taking donations for our coffee fund because apparently y'all need some. A little slow there.